Imagine holding a lottery ticket worth $28 million, the key to every dream you've ever had. Now imagine 17 years later, your own son having to lend you money for rent. It happened to me. This isn't just a story about losing a fortune. It's the story of how in gaining the world I lost myself, and how I had to fight like hell to find my way back. My name is Arthur, and if you saw me today, you wouldn't look twice. I'm 62 years old, with more grey in my hair than I'd care to admit, and hands that are softened not by leisure, but by the familiar texture of old paper. That's because, for the better part of my life, I was a librarian. Not a glamorous job, I know. It was quiet, predictable, and safe. My world smelled of aging glue and dust motes dancing in slivers of afternoon sun. My greatest professional drama was a misplaced copy of Moby Dick, or a patron arguing about a 10-cent late fee. My life outside the library was just as modest. I was married to my high school sweetheart, Clara. She was a kindergarten teacher, a woman whose patience and warmth could calm the most chaotic of storms, whether it was a classroom of 5-year-olds or my own quiet anxieties. We had one son, Leo, who at the time was a lanky, sharp-witted 15-year-old, more interested in video games and his garage band than anything I could find in the Dewey Decimal System. We lived in a 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where you know the mailman's name, and you borrow a cup of sugar from next door. Our dreams were scaled to the size of our lives. We didn't dream of yachts or private jets. We dreamed of paying off the mortgage 5 years early. We dreamed of taking a trip just once to see the cobblestone streets of Rome that Clara had shown me in art history books. My biggest, most ambitious dream was to ensure Leo could go to any college he wanted without being saddled with the mountain of debt that I had carried for years. I wasn't a man chasing wealth. I was a man chasing security. A little breathing room. That's all I wanted. And then, on a Tuesday in October, the universe decided to give me all the breathing room in the world, so much that it would eventually suffocate me. It was a completely unremarkable day. I was driving home from work. The sky was that weary shade of grey that promised a cold evening, and I needed to stop for milk. I pulled into a small convenience store, the kind with a buzzing fluorescent light and a faint smell of stale coffee. As I stood at the counter, my eyes landed on the lottery sign behind the cashier. $28 million jackpot, it screamed in loud, garish colors. I never played. It always seemed like a tax on people who were bad at math. But that day, for a reason I will never understand, maybe it was fate, maybe it was just a random impulse, I slid a $5 bill across the counter. "One quick pick, please," I said. The ticket went into my wallet, and I forgot all about it. That evening was business as usual. We had dinner, I helped Leo with his history homework, Clara and I watched some mindless TV. Around 10 p.m., as I was getting ready for bed, I emptied my pockets onto the dresser. Keys, loose change, my wallet, and the small, flimsy piece of paper fell out. The lottery ticket. Out of sheer boredom, I turned on the TV again, flipping to the local news channel just as they were announcing the winning numbers. Let me try to explain what happened next, though words have always failed me. The first number matched. That's neat, I thought. The second number matched. My heart gave a little thump. The third, the fourth, the fifth. By the time the announcer read the final Powerball number, the world had gone silent. The buzzing of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the sound of my own breathing, it all disappeared. All I could see were the numbers on that cheap piece of paper and the identical ones glowing on the television screen. They seemed to be burning into my retinas. My hands began to shake so violently that I had to put the ticket down on the dresser. I walked to the TV, my legs feeling like they were made of stone, and squinted at the screen. I walked back to the dresser. The numbers hadn't changed. I did this 3 more times, a silent, frantic pilgrimage between hope and disbelief. It was real. It wasn't a mistake. A sound escaped my throat. It wasn't a word. It was a raw, primal noise, a mixture of a gasp and a shout. Clara came running into the room, her face etched with alarm. "Arthur, what is it? What's wrong?" I couldn't speak. I just pointed, my finger trembling at the ticket and then at the TV. She followed my gaze, her brow furrowed in confusion. Then her eyes widened. She picked up the ticket, her hand steadier than mine. She read the numbers aloud, her voice barely a whisper. One by one, they all matched. She looked at me, her face pale, and whispered, "No, it can't be." That was the night that changed everything. The start of my incredible, dizzying rise and my catastrophic, soul-crushing fall. Before I tell you how it all unraveled, if you're new here, consider subscribing to the channel. I'm sharing this not for pity, but for perspective. And do me a favor, let me know in the comments what city or country you're watching from. It's a small comfort to know how far a story of caution can travel. We didn't sleep that night. We sat at our small kitchen table until the sun came up, the winning ticket lying between us like some sacred relic. We laughed until we cried, and we cried until we laughed again. $28 million. We mapped out our entire future on a dinner napkin. The mortgage, gone. Leo's college, paid for 4 times over. The trip to Rome was no longer a dream. We could buy a small villa there if we wanted. Every single financial worry, every tight budget, every maybe next year we had ever uttered, had been wiped off the face of the earth. The narrow, predictable road of my life had just exploded into an open-ended 10-lane superhighway with no speed limit. The first few weeks were a blur of lawyers and accountants. We followed every piece of advice in the book. We stayed anonymous, claiming the prize through a carefully constructed legal trust. We hired a reputable financial planner, a calm, methodical man named Mark, who preached diversification and long-term, low-risk investments. He advised us to take the lump sum, which, after state and federal taxes, came out to just over $17 million. $17 million. I remember seeing that number in a bank account with my name on it, and feeling a surge of power so potent it was almost dizzying. My first acts as a multimillionaire were, I thought, noble. We paid off our mortgage in full. I'll never forget the small ceremony we had in the backyard, burning the final bank statement in our barbecue pit. We set up an ironclad trust fund for Leo, ensuring his education and future were secure no matter what. We paid off my parents' home and gave both our siblings enough money to be debt-free. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just Arthur the librarian. I was Arthur the provider, the hero, the man who could solve any problem with the stroke of a pen. The gratitude in my family's eyes was intoxicating. It was a drug, and I was instantly addicted. I had a plan. I was smart. I listened to the experts. I wasn't going to become one of those horror stories you read about, the lottery winners who are broke again in 5 years. I was going to be the exception. I would be prudent, wise, and careful. My fortune would grow, my family would be safe forever, and I would be the master of my own destiny. I had the manual, I was following all the rules, and I was absolutely certain that nothing and no one could ever touch me. I wasn't just rich, I felt invincible. And that right there, that feeling was the beginning of the end. For the first year, we stayed in our modest suburban house. It felt like the sensible thing to do, but invincibility is a restless feeling. It chafes against the familiar. Our 3-bedroom home, once the vessel of all our dreams, started to feel like a cage. The floral wallpaper Clara had so lovingly put up seemed quaint and faded. The single garage, which had housed our dependable sedan for a decade, felt claustrophobic. The money in the bank wasn't just an abstract number. It was a living, breathing entity, and it demanded a grander stage. So we went looking for one. We found it in a gated community on the other side of town, a place called Eagle's Crest, where the lawns were perpetually green, and the silence was broken only by the whisper of sprinkler systems. Our new house wasn't a house. It was a statement. A 10,000-square-foot palace of beige stone and tinted glass, with a sweeping marble foyer where my voice would echo if I spoke too loudly. It had 6 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a home theater, a wine cellar, and a swimming pool with a waterfall feature. It was absurd, magnificent, and utterly soulless. We moved in, and our old life, along with most of our comfortable, well-worn furniture, was left behind. It was too small, too humble for the cavernous rooms that seemed to swallow sound and warmth. The garage now had 4 bays. Clara, ever practical, chose a sleek silver Mercedes. I, on the other hand, did something the old Arthur would have found vulgar. I bought a Ferrari. It was a screaming, fire-engine red machine that was completely impractical for suburban streets. Driving it was an exercise in frustration, all that power held back by 30-mile-per-hour speed limits. But I didn't buy it to drive. I bought it to be seen in. I loved the way heads would turn when I rumbled down the street. I loved the faint reflection of awe, or maybe envy, I saw in other people's eyes. That reflection became my new addiction. The librarian had been invisible. People looked right through me. But Arthur, the millionaire, was not only visible, he was fascinating. The money didn't just change my bank account, it changed the way the world interacted with me. My jokes, which had always been met with polite chuckles, were now hilarious. My opinions on everything from politics to wine, which I knew next to nothing about, were suddenly profound. I was surrounded by a new constellation of friends, people who materialized out of thin air, all gleaming teeth and firm handshakes. They were real estate developers, stockbrokers, and vague entrepreneurs who never seemed to have an office. We threw parties, lavish catered affairs where champagne flowed more freely than water, and the conversations were as shallow as the pool's tanning ledge. I was no longer the man who worried about a mortgage. I had become a man who felt he deserved this new kingdom. The money, I reasoned, hadn't changed me. It had merely revealed me. It had unshackled the brilliant, charismatic person who had been trapped inside a librarian's quiet life all along. I had a gift, an instinct for things, and the lottery win wasn't just luck, it was destiny recognizing my untapped potential. This dangerous narrative began to take root in my soul. Clara saw through the charade. She hated the new house, calling it the museum. She tolerated the new friends with a quiet, strained politeness that I chose to interpret as snobbery. "They don't know you, Arthur," she'd say late at night, her voice a soft plea in our enormous, empty bedroom. "They only know your bank account." "You're just not used to it," I'd reply, my tone defensive. "This is how this world works. You have to network. You have to make connections." Our real connection, the one forged over 20 years of shared struggles and simple joys, was fraying. She missed our old life, our old neighbors, the easy comfort of being anonymous. I, on the other hand, was terrified of ever going back. My financial planner, Mark, became another voice of unwelcome caution. His strategy for me was simple, and I was beginning to feel insultingly boring. He put the bulk of the fortune into a diversified portfolio of blue-chip stocks, municipal bonds, and index funds. It was the slow, steady, tortoise-and-the-hare approach. Every quarter we'd meet, and he'd proudly show me the modest but consistent growth. "The goal is capital preservation, Arthur," he'd say. "This money has to last you, your children, and your grandchildren." But I didn't want to preserve. I wanted to build. I wanted to conquer. What was the point of having all this power if all I did was let it sit in a corner, quietly collecting interest? I wanted to be a player, not just a spectator with a good seat. The seeds of my arrogance were being watered daily by the sycophants who surrounded me, and they were beginning to sprout. The first crack in my perfect, invincible fortress appeared in the form of a ghost from my past. His name was Rick. I'd known him in high school. He was one of those effortlessly cool guys who was always running some minor hustle, selling concert tickets, organizing poker games. We hadn't spoken in 20 years, but he called me out of the blue, having heard of my good fortune through the grapevine. He was slick, charming, and remembered details about my life that made me feel instantly at ease. He didn't ask for a loan, which was what I'd come to expect from long-lost acquaintances. Instead, he wanted to offer me an opportunity. He was a partner in a new upscale restaurant venture in the city's trendiest district. It was called Aura, a name as pretentious as its concept, a high-end steakhouse with a fusion twist and a private members-only lounge. Rick painted a beautiful picture. He talked about celebrity chefs, exclusive clientele, and the sheer prestige of being an owner. "This isn't just an investment, Artie," he said, using my old high school nickname. "It's a lifestyle. Imagine, you walk in any night of the week, no reservation needed. It's your table, people will see you, know you're the man behind it all." His pitch was a masterclass in appealing directly to my ego. He wasn't selling me on profit margins. He was selling me a new, more impressive identity than guy who got lucky. The initial investment was $500,000. It was a significant sum, but to me it felt like a drop in the bucket. I took the proposal to Mark. My planner spent a week poring over the business plan Rick had provided. When we met again, his face was grim. He laid out the problems with clinical precision. The revenue projections were wildly optimistic. The overhead costs for the location and staffing were astronomical. The restaurant industry was notoriously volatile, with a failure rate of over 60% in the first year. "Arthur, this is a textbook vanity project," Mark concluded, his tone serious. "It's a black hole for money. I strongly advise against this." I listened, but I didn't hear him. All I heard was the same cautious, boring drone that told me to be content with index funds. I saw his advice not as protective, but as patronizing. He was still treating me like the timid librarian, not the visionary I now believed myself to be. A hot surge of defiance coursed through me. I needed to prove him wrong. I needed to show him and everyone that I had a Midas touch, that my instincts were sharper than his spreadsheets. "You're a numbers guy, Mark," I said, a condescending smirk on my face that makes me cringe to remember. "You don't understand vision. You don't understand branding. Sometimes you have to take a risk to get a real reward." He just looked at me, a deep sadness in his eyes. "The biggest risk here," he said quietly, "is letting your ego write the checks." I ignored him. The next day I met Rick at the bank and authorized the wire transfer for $500,000. As the teller stamped the final document, a jolt of adrenaline shot through me. It was a feeling of pure power, of defiance, of taking control. I wasn't just buying into a restaurant. I was buying a seat at the table of the men I now aspired to be. I had no idea that I had just paid an exorbitant price for the first nail in my own coffin. Aura opened to a symphony of flashbulbs and fawning reviews from lifestyle bloggers who were more interested in the complimentary champagne than the food. From a financial standpoint, it was precisely the disaster Mark had predicted. The restaurant hemorrhaged money. The payroll was bloated, the cost of premium ingredients was staggering, and my partner, Rick, had a talent for promotional expenses that seemed to involve frequent trips to Las Vegas. Every month, I found myself injecting another $50,000 or $100,000 just to keep the lights on. But I didn't see it as a loss. I saw it as the price of admission. The restaurant became my personal court. I'd sit at my designated corner table, nursing an overpriced scotch and hold court. People would come to me, their heads slightly bowed, to pay their respects. They'd praise the decor, compliment the wine list I hadn't chosen, and laugh a little too loudly at my pronouncements. I was no longer a man. I was a landmark. The old Arthur, the man who found solace in the quiet aisles of the library, was a distant, pathetic memory. This new Arthur was a magnate, a tastemaker, a man of consequence, and in the center of this glittering, artificial universe, I met the man who would become the architect of my ruin. His name was Marcus Thorne. He didn't approach me with a business plan or a desperate plea like the others. He was introduced by a mutual acquaintance, and he carried himself with an aura of detached elegance. He was in his early 50s, with silvering temples, a tailored suit that probably cost more than my first car, and a watch that was a quiet statement of immense wealth. He spoke in a low, measured baritone, and when he looked at you, he had a way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. Marcus wasn't a sycophant. He didn't flatter me. In fact, he was the first person in months to challenge me. He'd listen to me pontificate about the stock market, and then, with a small, knowing smile, say something like, "The domestic market is for amateurs, Arthur. It's a children's sandbox. The real game is played on a global stage." He spoke of a world I couldn't comprehend: hedge funds in the Cayman Islands, private equity in Singapore, currency trading in Zurich. He made my diversified portfolio with Mark sound like a child's piggy bank. He wasn't just wealthy, he was sophisticated. He was everything I desperately wanted to be. He became my mentor, my confidant. He never asked me for a single dollar. Instead, he offered advice, sharing anecdotes about deals he'd made and lamenting the pedestrian mindset of traditional financial planners. "They're trained to protect you from losing," he once said, swirling a glass of vintage Bordeaux. "They aren't trained to help you win. They play defense. True empire builders, men like us, Arthur, we play offense." The more time I spent with Marcus, the deeper the chasm grew between me and my family. Clara refused to set foot in Aura. "It's not a restaurant, Arthur," she told me one evening, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. "It's a stage, and everyone is playing a part, especially you." The vastness of our mansion became a suffocating silence, punctuated by brief, sterile conversations. We were two strangers, cohabiting in a luxury hotel. The easy laughter that once filled our small kitchen was gone, replaced by the echo of unspoken resentments. Leo, now home from his first year of college, was even more direct. I'd brought Marcus to the house for dinner one night, hoping to impress my son with his worldliness. Leo was polite but distant. After Marcus left, the facade dropped. "Dad, that guy is a shark," Leo said, his arms crossed. "Everything he says is designed to make you feel special and stupid at the same time." I felt a hot flash of anger. "You don't know what you're talking about," I snapped. "You're a kid. Marcus is a brilliant financial mind. He operates on a level you can't even imagine." "I can imagine a con artist when I see one," Leo shot back. "He's just a fancier version of Rick. All he sees when he looks at you is a walking ATM." The insult stung, mostly because a tiny buried part of me feared it might be true. But I couldn't admit it. My entire new identity was built on the premise that I was an astute judge of character, a natural in this world of high finance. To admit Leo was right would be to admit I was still just the gullible librarian who got lucky. So I did what all cowards do. I attacked. "That's enough. You should be grateful for the life you have, a life I am providing. Don't you dare disrespect my guests or my judgment again." The look of disappointment on his face was a physical blow, but my pride was a thicker shield than my love. A few weeks later, Marcus made his move. It was subtle, almost casual. We were having lunch when he sighed, a theatrical display of frustration. He told me he was closing a round of funding for an exclusive offshore technology fund. It was invested in a portfolio of pre-IPO startups in biotech and artificial intelligence, companies poised to change the world. The fund, he explained, had delivered an average return of 40% annually for the past 3 years. "The problem," he said, tapping his fork on his plate, "is that my partners are timid. They want to bring in institutional money, but I refuse. This is a private circle. It's for visionaries, not for committees." He looked me straight in the eye. "It's for men who understand that you can't hit a home run by bunting." My heart began to hammer in my chest. This was it. This was the moment I would graduate from the minor leagues. Is there any room left in the fund?" I asked, trying to sound casual, as if I were inquiring about the weather. Marcus paused, feigning deep thought. "It's a $5 million minimum buy-in, Arthur. It's a significant commitment." "I understand," I said, my voice firm. 5 million. It was a terrifying number, but the prospect of a 40% return was intoxicating. That was $2 million a year. It would make the $500,000 I'd torched on the restaurant look like pocket change. More than the money, it was the validation. This would be my definitive proof that I belonged in his world. I knew, with absolute certainty, what Mark would say. But I had to perform the ritual of consulting him. I walked into his office the next day, not for advice, but for a confrontation. I laid out the proposal from Marcus. Mark listened patiently, his expression growing more and more grave. When I finished, he took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, the gesture of a profoundly weary man. "Arthur," he began, his voice low and steady, "I want you to listen to me very carefully. Everything about this screams fraud. An offshore fund with no regulatory oversight, guaranteed returns of 40%. That's not an investment strategy. It's the classic calling card of a Ponzi scheme. There are no documents, no prospectus, no verifiable history. This man, Marcus, is a predator, and he has found his whale." Every word was a direct assault on my ego. Fraud, scheme, predator, whale. He was calling me a fool. The rage that had been simmering for months finally boiled over. "You don't get it because it's not your world." I stood up, my voice rising. "You're content with your pathetic 3% returns and your safe little bonds. You have no ambition, no vision. Marcus is a genius, and you're just a glorified bookkeeper trying to keep me in a cage, you understand." Mark stood up too, his calmness a stark contrast to my fury. "That cage, as you call it, is called security, Arthur. It's called protecting your family's future. This path you're on leads to ruin. I am begging you, as not just your advisor, but as someone who genuinely cares, do not do this. Do not throw your family's future away for this charlatan. His plea was the final insult. He wasn't just questioning my decision, he was questioning my very identity. In that moment, he represented everything I was running from: caution, modesty, simplicity, the old Arthur. And I had to kill him off for good. I looked at him, the man who had guided me from the very beginning, the only person who had consistently told me the unvarnished truth, and I spoke the words that would echo in the ruins of my life for years to come. "You're fired, Mark." He just stared at me, his face a mask of profound sorrow and resignation. He nodded slowly. "I see. I'll have my office forward the transfer paperwork to you." I walked out of his office and into the bright sunshine, feeling a dizzying sense of liberation. I had shed my last piece of baggage. I was free from the shackles of mediocrity. No more naysayers, no more boring advice. It was just me and Marcus, two visionaries on the cusp of building an empire. I felt powerful. I felt untouchable. I felt for the first time truly free. In reality, I had just gleefully sawn off the branch I was sitting on. Firing Mark felt like the ultimate declaration of independence. I had cast off the last of my safety nets, and the feeling was not one of fear, but of exhilarating vertigo. With no one left to challenge my judgment, Marcus Thorne became the sole gatekeeper to my financial world and, by extension, to my sense of self-worth. He was no longer just an advisor. He was my guru, my confessor, the high priest of my newfound religion of wealth. The $5 million transfer into his Orion Technology Fund was seamless. Within a week, I received access to a lavishly designed online portal. It was a masterpiece of digital deception, updated daily with impressive charts, intricate performance analytics, and a bottom-line number that climbed with mesmerizing consistency. Watching that number grow became my daily ritual. I'd log in every morning, coffee in hand, and see my initial investment blossom. It was up 5% in the first month, 12% by the end of the quarter. The figures were concrete, undeniable proof of my genius and Mark's pathetic timidity. I would take screenshots and casually show them to people at the restaurant, a smug, self-satisfied look on my face. "Just a little something I'm dabbling in," I'd say, as if I were a seasoned Wall Street titan. I was no longer just the lottery guy. I was an investor, a visionary who saw opportunities others missed. The narrative I had constructed for myself was now supported by what I believed to be irrefutable data. The profits were, of course, entirely fictional. As Marcus explained it, the fund's strategy relied on aggressive reinvestment of all gains to achieve exponential growth. "Pulling money out now," he'd say with a patient smile, "would be like pulling a sapling out of the ground to see if the roots are growing." It made perfect sense to me. I wasn't just investing, I was compounding my brilliance. My life settled into a new, decadent rhythm. My days were a series of long lunches with Marcus, evenings holding court at Aura, and weekends spent on impulsive shopping sprees. I bought a ludicrously expensive Patek Philippe watch, not because I liked it, but because Marcus had one. I started a collection of rare wines based on his recommendations, filling the cellar of our cavernous house with bottles I would never open and couldn't truly appreciate. My spending was no longer about enjoyment, it was about performance. I was playing the part of an ultra-wealthy man, and I was determined to win an Oscar for it. The isolation from my family became absolute. Clara retreated into her own world. She took up painting, spending hours in a sunroom at the far end of the house, creating beautiful, vibrant canvases that were a stark contrast to the sterile grayness of our life together. We were orbiting each other in the same massive space, two planets in a cold, silent solar system. Leo rarely came home from college, even for holidays. Our phone calls were brief and stilted, mine filled with boasts about the fund's performance, his filled with monosyllabic answers that were polite but clearly disinterested. He had given up trying to warn me. He was now just a spectator to my slow-motion self-destruction. I told myself their distance was a form of jealousy, a failure on their part to embrace the magnificent new reality I had created. I had lifted them out of mediocrity, and they resented me for it. It was a comforting, self-serving lie that allowed me to continue my descent without the burden of guilt. I was a king in a kingdom of one, and I was too blind to see that the walls were closing in. About a year after my initial investment, Marcus presented what he called the capstone project. He invited me not to a restaurant but to a private jet terminal. We flew to a small, sun-drenched island in the Caribbean. As we descended, he pointed out a pristine stretch of coastline, a breathtaking panorama of white sand and turquoise water. "Behold, Arthur," he said, his voice resonating with theatrical gravitas. "The future site of the Elysian Resort, the most exclusive ultra-luxury destination in the Western Hemisphere." For the next 2 days, he put on a spectacular show. We were met by architects with impressive blueprints, surveyors who spoke of zoning approvals, and local dignitaries who shook my hand and spoke of the economic boom the project would bring. It was a perfectly staged illusion of legitimacy. Marcus explained that the project was already fully funded by a consortium of anonymous international investors. However, a final, unexpected opportunity had arisen. One of the principal backers had to pull out for personal reasons, leaving a $10 million equity share on the table. It was a chance, he said, to get in on the ground floor of a project that wouldn't just generate millions, but would create a legacy. "This is bigger than any fund, Arthur," he explained as we sat on a terrace overlooking the ocean, sipping rum that tasted of sunshine and molasses. "This is brick and mortar. This is a name on a map. People will fly from all over the world to stay at a place we built. Imagine that. The Thorn Arthur Elysian. It has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" He had found my deepest, most pathetic insecurity, the need to be remembered for something other than dumb luck. The librarian had catalogued the works of great men. He had never created anything of his own. Winning the lottery hadn't filled that void, it had only highlighted it. The restaurant was a failing vanity project. The tech fund was an abstract number on a screen. But this was tangible, a monument, my monument, $10 million. Even for me, that was a staggering sum. It was nearly all that remained of my liquid fortune outside of the Orion Fund. To raise it, I would have to do the unthinkable. I would have to take out a mortgage on our palace, the very symbol of my financial triumph. When I returned home, brimming with the zeal of a convert, I told Clara, I expected her to be thrilled, to finally see the scale of my vision. Instead, her face went ashen. For the first time in a long time, the quiet resignation in her eyes was replaced by a fierce, protective fire. "No," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Absolutely not. You will not risk our home, the only real thing we have left, on another one of this man's schemes." "It's not a scheme, Clara. It's a world-class development," I protested, unrolling the glossy architectural drawings across our massive dining room table. "This is our legacy, for Leo, for his children." "Leo doesn't want a legacy built on sand," she cried, her voice cracking. "He wants his father back, the father who read him bedtime stories, not the one who checks a fake stock portfolio all day. We have everything we could ever need, Arthur. More than everything. Why is it never enough for you?" Her words were a direct hit, piercing through the armor of my arrogance. For a fleeting second I saw the truth. I saw the hollowness in my life, the fear that was driving me, the desperate need for validation from strangers because I had alienated the people who truly loved me. I saw the old Arthur, the happy, simple man, looking back at me with pity. But the king could not abdicate his throne. To admit she was right would be to confess that my entire life for the past 2 years had been a colossal mistake. It was too much to bear. So, I fortified my defenses with rage. "You don't understand because you think small," I said, my voice dripping with a cold, cruel condescension that I will regret until my dying day. "You were content in that little box of a house with our little box of a life. I'm not. Some men are meant to build empires. Others are meant to just live in them. You simply don't have the vision to comprehend what I'm doing." She flinched as if I had struck her. She didn't argue anymore. She just looked at me, and in her eyes I saw the final flicker of hope die out. She saw that the man she had married was gone, replaced by this monstrous caricature of ambition. The next day I went to the bank alone. I signed the mountain of paperwork, leveraging our home to the hilt. The loan was approved almost instantly. The bank saw the stone and marble and acres of manicured lawn, and saw a flawless asset. They couldn't see the rot in the foundation. I transferred the $10 million to a holding company Marcus had established. As the final confirmation flashed on the screen, I didn't feel the thrill I had expected. There was just a cold, hollow pit in my stomach. I walked out of the bank feeling like an emperor who had just conquered the world. In truth, I was a court jester who had just willingly handed over the keys to the kingdom and signed his own death warrant. And just like that, I had pushed all my chips to the center of the table. Every last one. My entire world was now balanced on the promises of one man. If you've been on this journey with me so far, I ask you to subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss the final, hard-learned lesson. And I want you to tell me in the comments, what do you think was my fatal flaw? Was it the greed for more, the arrogance of believing I was untouchable, or the blind trust I placed in a wolf disguised as a shepherd? As you're about to see, it was a deadly cocktail of all three. For a week, everything was quiet. Too quiet. My daily calls to Marcus, which he usually answered with booming enthusiasm, now went to voicemail. Just swamped with the final paperwork for the Elysian, Arthur. Big things are happening, his outgoing message chirped. I clung to those words like a prayer. I refreshed the Orion Fund portal, which was still showing healthy, robust gains, a digital mirage in the desert of my growing anxiety. I told myself this was what it felt like to be in the big leagues, a period of intense, silent maneuvering before the triumphant announcement. The first tremor hit on a Tuesday morning. It was an email from the bank, a sterile automated notification. Subject: your mortgage payment is past due. I stared at it, confused. I had arranged for the first payment to be automatically deducted. I tried to log into my primary bank account to check the transaction. The screen flashed an unfamiliar message. Account access has been temporarily suspended. Please contact customer service. A cold dread, sharp and metallic, began to creep up my spine. I called the bank's premium client line, a number I had once used to effortlessly arrange international wire transfers. This time, the friendly, concierge-like tone was gone. The woman on the other end was polite but firm. There was a hold on my accounts, a legal matter. She couldn't provide any more details over the phone. Panic began its frantic assault on my composure. I tried calling Marcus again, straight to voicemail. I tried his office number. A recorded message. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. I felt the floor drop out from under me. I logged back into the Orion Fund portal, my hands shaking so badly I could barely type the password. This time, the screen was different. The charts, the analytics, the beautiful climbing numbers, all gone. It was replaced by a single stark white page with 4 words in the center. This domain is for sale. That was the moment the illusion shattered. It didn't crumble. It exploded into a million pieces. The entire world I had built, my identity as a financial wizard, the exclusive funds, the Caribbean resort, the sophisticated mentor, it was all a lie. A meticulously crafted, breathtakingly cruel fiction designed for an audience of one. Me. The horrifying truth crashed down on me with the force of a physical blow. There was no Orion Fund. There was no Elysian resort. There was only Marcus Thorne, a con artist of prodigious talent, and me, his willing, arrogant, idiotic mark. The days that followed were a descent into a special kind of hell. It began with a cascade of notifications. The mortgage default was just the first domino. Next came the credit card companies, a chorus of angry calls and letters about maxed-out accounts I had used to fund my lavish lifestyle and prop up the failing restaurant. The bank unceremoniously seized every liquid asset I had left to cover a fraction of the debt. The $17 million that had once seemed like an infinite ocean had evaporated, leaving behind a barren, salt-crusted wasteland of liabilities. The news of my spectacular collapse spread through the manicured lawns of Eagle's Crest like a wildfire. The friends who had once clamored for my attention now averted their gaze when they saw me. The invitations stopped. My calls went unanswered. The sycophants who had fed my ego were the first to disappear, melting back into the shadows from which they came. My phone, which had once been a constant source of validation, fell silent. The silence was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. The restaurant, my monument to vanity, was the next to go. With my funds frozen, I could no longer cover its massive overhead. Rick, my partner, showed his true colors. He drained the last of the business accounts and vanished, leaving me to face the unpaid suppliers, the furious staff, and the eviction notice taped to the grand glass doors of Aura. I had to declare the business bankrupt, a public humiliation that was gleefully reported in the local papers. "Lottery millionaire's restaurant empire crumbles," one headline crowed. The final, most devastating blow was the loss of our home. The foreclosure notice arrived on a crisp autumn day. Seeing that official, heartless document was surreal. I remembered the day we bought the house, the feeling of triumph, of having arrived. Now it was just a gilded cage from which we were about to be evicted. The process was swift and brutal. Surveyors came to appraise the property. Men in suits walked through our rooms, clipboards in hand, cataloguing our lives for auction. The Ferrari and the Mercedes were repossessed from the driveway in the dead of night, hauled away like scrap metal. Clara watched it all with a profound, heartbreaking sadness. There was no "I told you so." There was no anger, there was only grief. She was mourning the man I had been and the future we had lost. One evening, as we sat in the cavernous living room, surrounded by packing boxes, she finally spoke the words I had been dreading. "I can't do this anymore, Arthur," she said, her voice a fragile whisper. "I don't know who you are, and I think you don't either. I need to go. I need to find a place where I can breathe again." I wanted to beg her to stay. I wanted to promise I would fix it, that I would get it all back. But I had nothing left. The lies had run out. The arrogance had been shattered. All that remained was the pathetic, hollow shell of a man. I just nodded, unable to speak past the lump of shame lodged in my throat. She packed a single suitcase and her painting supplies, and her brother came to pick her up. As she stood in the doorway of the marble foyer, she turned to me one last time. "I hope you find your way back, Arthur. I truly do." Then she was gone. The day of the auction was the nadir. I watched from a distance as strangers picked through the remnants of my life, our furniture, Clara's art, Leo's childhood belongings, all sold for pennies on the dollar to satisfy the creditors. I was left with a few suitcases of clothes, a box of old books from my librarian days, and a few $1,000s the bankruptcy court allowed me to keep. At 52 years old, I was homeless, jobless, wifeless, and stripped bare of every last shred of dignity. I had flown as close to the sun as a man could, and my wings, which I had believed were made of gold, had turned out to be nothing more than wax and feathers. And now, I was in a free-fall, with no bottom in sight. The bottom, when I finally hit it, was not a fiery crash, but a dull, hollow thud. It was a one-room apartment above a laundromat on the industrial side of town, a place that smelled perpetually of damp linen and bleach. The rent was cheap, and the landlord didn't ask for a credit check. For the first few months I barely left that room. The shame was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket that made it hard to breathe. I was a ghost, haunting the ruins of my own life. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Marcus Thorne's knowing smile, the disappointment in Leo's face, the final heartbreaking look of pity in Clara's eyes. Sleep offered no escape. It was just a different theater for the same horror show. Humiliation became my constant companion. I, who had once owned a Ferrari, was now counting loose change to ride the city bus. I, who had once hosted 100-person galas, was now eating canned soup alone. The sound of the washing machines below a constant, churning reminder of my new reality. The world I had once commanded was now utterly indifferent to my existence. I was anonymous again, but this was not the comfortable, quiet anonymity of the librarian. This was the crushing, isolating invisibility of a failure. I had lost more than money. I had lost my name, my identity, my very sense of purpose. I was nothing. My survival instinct, long dormant and buried under layers of luxury and arrogance, finally kicked in. I needed a job. Any job. The irony was savage. After dozens of rejections, a 52-year-old man with a 7-year gap in his resume is not an appealing candidate. I found work in the place I was most overqualified for and perhaps most deserved to be, a massive book warehouse on the outskirts of the city. My job was to unpack boxes of new arrivals and shelve them on towering metal racks. It was mindless, physically demanding work. My back ached, my hands grew calloused, and my pride was shattered into a million infinitesimal pieces. I was earning minimum wage, surrounded by men half my age who didn't know my story and wouldn't have cared if they did. And in that crucible of humility, something unexpected began to happen. The noise in my head started to fade. The relentless chorus of what-ifs and regrets began to quiet down, replaced by the simple, rhythmic reality of my work. Lifting, carrying, sorting. There was no room for ego in that warehouse, no space for self-pity. There was only the task at hand. For the first time in years, my value wasn't tied to a stock portfolio or the opinion of others. It was tied to the tangible accomplishment of a neatly stacked pallet of books. It wasn't much, but it was real. It was honest. One Saturday afternoon, there was a knock on the flimsy door of my apartment. I opened it to find my son, Leo, standing in the hallway. He looked older, his face leaner, his eyes holding a maturity that startled me. He was holding a bag of groceries. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't lecture me. He just looked at the sparse, grim little room, then at me, and said, "I thought you might need this." That was the moment the dam broke. All the grief, the shame, the self-loathing I had held inside came pouring out in a torrent of ragged, choked sobs. I collapsed onto a rickety chair, and this tall, strong young man who was my son knelt in front of me, put his hand on my shoulder, and just waited for the storm to pass. He didn't try to fix me. He just stayed. In that moment, he gave me a gift more valuable than $17 million. He gave me grace. That was the beginning of my long, slow journey back. Leo started visiting every weekend. We'd talk, not about the money or the mistakes, but about his classes, about a girl he liked, about music. We were rebuilding our relationship from the ground up, one simple, honest conversation at a time. Through him, I began to tentatively reconnect with Clara. She had moved into a small apartment of her own and had gone back to teaching. Our first few conversations were awkward, filled with the ghosts of old wounds. I didn't ask for her forgiveness because I didn't feel I deserved it. I simply apologized for my arrogance, for my cruelty, for the man I had become. I told her she had been right about everything. The biggest lesson I learned wasn't about finance or the dangers of greed. It was far more profound. I used to think the lottery ticket had given me everything. I was wrong. It was a curse. The money didn't create the flaws in my character, the insecurity, the ego, the desperate need for approval. But it acted like a powerful fertilizer, making them grow into monstrous, life-choking weeds. Losing every single penny was the truest blessing of my life. It was a controlled burn that cleared out all the rot and allowed something new, something genuine, to finally grow. I had to be reduced to nothing to rediscover what was truly of value. The real currency of life isn't found in a bank vault. It's in a shared laugh with your wife over a simple meal. It's in the quiet pride you feel listening to your son talk about his future. It's in the peace of mind that comes from knowing who you are, independent of what you own. I had lost an empire of things, but in the process, I had found my soul. Today, 10 years later, my life is unrecognizable from both its peaks and its valleys. I am 62. I never became a millionaire again. I never even tried. I eventually left the warehouse and, through a series of fortunate events and a recommendation from an old colleague, I got a part-time job at the local community library, the very place where my story began. The smell of old paper is no longer a reminder of a life I escaped, but a comforting scent of my true home. Clara and I found our way back to each other. It took time, patience, and a lot of therapy, but the love that had been buried under all that wreckage was, miraculously, still there. We live in a small, rented house with a little garden out back that she adores. We don't have a Ferrari, but we take long walks in the park holding hands. We don't have a mansion, but our home is filled with warmth and laughter. Leo is now a successful architect. He designs real buildings, not imaginary resorts, and is married to a wonderful woman. Every Sunday they come over for dinner. In those moments, sitting around a small table, sharing a simple meal with the people I love, I feel a richness so profound it makes my former life seem like a pale, pathetic imitation. I am, without a shadow of a doubt, the wealthiest man I have ever been. This is my story. It's a cautionary tale, yes, but I hope it's something more. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and a reminder of what truly matters. If it has touched you in any way, please share this video with someone who might need to hear this message. And finally, I'd like you to leave a comment and tell me, what is the most important lesson that life or money has ever taught you? I will read every single one. Thank you for listening.